Joining me from Washington is CBS News senior political editor Steve Chaggaris and CBS News political analyst Jamelle Bouie. Thank you both for being with us. Steve, let me start with you. Today is Donald Trump's third straight day in Florida. Trump himself called Florida a must-win in an interview earlier. So the question is, what does this campaign have to do to make up the lost ground in that state?
Well, I don't think it's going to be very easy. First of all, we just had a poll out this weekend. It shows that 6% of Florida voters might or probably will change their mind before Election Day. So that's not a huge number of people that we're working with here. Secondly, he needs to shore up Republican support. He's trailing in terms of getting his own party behind him compared to where Hillary Clinton is with Democrats in that state. And then also, I think he just needs to focus less on his controversies and more on his vision. There's an interesting question in that poll that I was referencing, which asks Clinton voters who haven't voted yet, what would they do to consider? What could he do to get them to consider voting for him? And 24% said that he talks about shaking up the political system. So if he gets back on message, then perhaps there's some voters there that he can sort of sway to his side.
Jamelle, let me ask you this: just in time for the election, the White House announced that Obamacare premiums for some plans would be going up by double digits. Will Hillary Clinton be able to respond to the Affordable Care Act rate hikes, or is she going to stay away from that? And there was an interesting piece in Politico this morning about this very thing, which sort of posits that perhaps the media hasn't covered the Obamacare situation as perhaps adeptly as we should have, because these exchanges may only be affecting a small minority of the population.
Right. What's sort of complicated about this entire issue is that it's not easy to condense into a soundbite. So in the case of the rate increases, this applies to the 11 million Americans who get their insurance on the exchanges, but specifically it applies to the 15% of that 11 million who do not get subsidies from the government to help pay for coverage, which ends up being about 1.65 million people for whom this is applicable. You can't explain that in the course of 30 seconds, or it's a little difficult to do so. So I think Clinton most likely will approach this the way she's approached the Obamacare conversation this entire time. That Obamacare was an advance for the American healthcare system, that the Affordable Care Act ended up providing coverage to a lot of people who didn't have it, that we still need to do work on the Affordable Care Act, and this will ultimately, I think, for her, become a way to blame Republicans for obstruction on doing that work. And that's basically been her formula for addressing questions related to the Affordable Care Act this entire election.
And so, Steve, as Jamelle points out, it's not always difficult to talk about this subject, but Donald Trump and his campaign have made it a point of contention. He has called Obamacare a disaster. He said he's going to repeal it. And obviously, President Bill Clinton hasn't helped, because he was caught on camera at one point saying that this was a crazy plan, and he's seized upon that. So is the campaign expected to use this premium story to its advantage?
Well, you mentioned the Bill Clinton comment, and that goes to what Jamelle was just saying, how complicated it is to explain sometimes. And you saw Trump really seize on that moment a few weeks ago, and he's definitely going to seize on this moment about the hikes. This is an issue that's ready-made for the Republicans. I mean, let's keep in mind, Obamacare approval among Americans is still split. And what Republicans say to me is that this is an issue that resonates with voters, at least people in their districts at the House level and Senate campaigns. Healthcare is still a major issue for voters, not necessarily the top issue, but definitely one of the top issues for people. So I think weighing in on this early and often for Trump and for down ballot candidates is something you're going to hear a lot of Republicans do over the next couple of weeks.
All right, let's switch gears here. Jamelle, Jen Ford conducted an interesting study that shows 60% of likely voters between 18 and 30 voting for Hillary Clinton this year. Now, that's kind of interesting, because a lot of those folks were initially backing Bernie Sanders, and there was some thought that they might not necessarily back Hillary Clinton, but now they appear to be leaning towards her. So what happened to that protest vote, or even voting third party? In this poll, we show Gary Johnson with only 12% of that vote, that block.
So, traditionally in most elections, the percentage of people who claim to be making a protest vote or voting third party declines as the election comes to a close. And I think that's what we're seeing here. You certainly had a lot of younger voters who supported Bernie Sanders, who like Bernie Sanders, who were very disappointed by Sanders' loss. And for the past couple months, there's been plenty of space for them kind of emotionally, politically, to say essentially that we're not happy with what happened. You want to see Clinton make more concessions. Since, I think, September, the Clinton campaign has made a renewed focus on millennial voters. It has tried to speak to their issues. And then in addition to all of this, you've seen kind of the natural kind of reversion to the mean when it comes to who people are voting for. I think Gary Johnson and Jill Stein will do better than they did in 2012, certainly, but I don't think we're going to see the near double-digit numbers that you saw earlier in the season. I think the big question with young voters at this point is not how they vote. They're overwhelmingly going to vote for Clinton, but what their turnout looks like, whether they're going to turn out at the roughly 14 or 15% that you saw in 2008 and 2012.
All right, before I let you guys go, I want to play a bit of Saturday Night Live from this weekend where the cast members reenacted a version of Jeopardy. Take a look.
They out here saying that every vote counts. Oh, Doug again.
What is, come on, they already decided who wins even before it happens.
Yes! 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 And the Illuminati figured that out months ago. That's another one for Doug. Let's take a look at our final Jeopardy category. Lives that matter. Well, it was good while it lasted, Doug.
I got a lot to say about this.
Yeah, I'm sure you do.
All right, Jamelle, you wrote a great piece for Slate. The character played by Tom Hanks embodies a lot of what the media fails to portray when they talk about Trump voters, in that there are many folks, whether they're white or black, that share some of the very same concerns about Hillary Clinton, for example, about some of her policies, and that transcends color, that transcends the race divide sometimes in our country. But that last question in Jeopardy sort of turns that also on its head. Just give us a sense of what you were talking about.
Right. Well, that Lives That Matter joke, that punchline, I think what it signals is that for as much as there are commonalities and similarities between many black Americans, especially working class black Americans, and many working class white Americans, there is a real and material and meaningful divide on this question of whether or not society, and specifically the criminal justice system, is fair to black Americans. And black Americans overwhelmingly say that it isn't, and that this is a critical political issue for them. And many white Americans and working class white Americans are very skeptical. And that divide, I think, is important when trying to understand why there isn't a kind of broad-based populism. It isn't because people don't understand that there are similarities, but because there are real differences and oppositions between the two groups. And unless white Americans and sort of the real-life Dougs of the world, unless they can begin to see that the black demand for safety and security is not threatening to them, then that sort of inability to make these cross-racial alliances will persist.
And Steve, I guess, it's probably too late for Donald Trump, but for some of those down-ballot Republicans, is it too late for them to appeal and say, look, there are real concerns that affect people, that whether you're white or you're black, and they have some of those same concerns, come to the Republican tent, we can address them and address that final point about, for example, police brutality?
Yeah, it's probably a little too late at this point, with 2 weeks left in the election. But again, this is the thing that Reince Priebus and other Republican leaders were talking about before Donald Trump became the nominee of the Republican Party, which was broadening the tent and talking about issues in a way that's more inclusive. So we'll see if there's an opportunity for them to do that after this election.
All right, Steve Chaggaris, CBS News senior political editor, and Jamelle Bouie, CBS News political analyst. We thank you both. Great discussion. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thank you.